and they announced that I had a phone call from Steven Spielberg. Yeah, and I'm like, the heck? And it was a little odd. I mean, I had an agent in New York that was literary agent in New York that was putting my scripts out because I started writing scripts. So I get a phone call from Steven Spielberg, and I'm thinking, God, they read one of my scripts? Turns out they had, but it wasn't this phone call. So so I get up, and of course I'm walking through the building, and everybody's like going, staring at me as I go by. And I get to the phone. I said, hello? He goes, Jim, this is Scott Ross. I'm like, oh. And he said, yeah, I got your resume. Can you be over here by 4 o'clock? So I'd seen an article in Variety that Jim Cameron and Stan Winston and Scott Ross were forming a new company in Los Angeles. And I'd always wanted to work at ILM, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to do something similar. So I go to work with my resume printed out and fax it from Metrolite over to Lightstorm. And I get this phone call from Scott a couple of hours later. And of course, he was just being a goofball with the Steven Spielberg thing. Made sure I pick up the phone, I guess. And I'm walking in, and it's like, here's metal sculptures of the Terminator turning from like metal to, himself, and just all the stuff from T2. And Scott comes up and greets me and says, hey, we're going to be in here in this big conference room off the office. Go in the conference room, and then this other guy comes in with my resume in his hand. It's Jim Cameron, and they sit down and interview me. I don't even remember what was said. I was just like, They hired me to be to work in the company, and there were maybe 7 or 8 of us who were there at that time, and they said, well, we need someone on the sort of the council to represent what's going on with digital. I want Jim to be director of digital production, so that was my first job. The first thing I helped out with was, of course, Color of Night, which was the first film we did any effects for, which no one lays claim to. And Interview with the Vampire was sort of our first semi-official film after Color of Night. So Stan was doing the, all the makeup effects and teeth and all that stuff. And I was the digital effects supervisor, and Rob Legato was the visual effects supervisor. Didn't seem like there was going to be a lot of shots. It turned out to be a lot more than we thought, about twice as much. But back then, I think we had a pretty small crew, and we were did probably just under 100 shots in the film. We had to put a sword through Tom Cruise, like a foil.
A lot of people want to do that.
I've heard that. And then Brad Pitt's in bed, and he pulls a sword on him, and he just leans into it and goes through him. And we had to shoot a bullet through his hand and have it heal on camera, and we had to drain the blood out of Brad Pitt when he gets attacked. We had to put ships in a harbor and water out there that you could see. I ended up doing CG water, for what was back there. And then we shot a bunch of miniature ships on gimbals, so they look like they're out there rocking in the harbor, and put that all together in flames back in the day. We were still writing Nuke. We actually used Nuke on the film, but it was all shell scripted. There was a makeup problem with putting blue veins on Brad Pitt's face in close-up, and so it didn't look too hot. So we came up with a way of sort of substituting out the green channel with blue channel and softening it and getting it to fade into the skin a little bit. So that worked out well. Did about 9 shots of that. There was a lot of day for night stuff. We had to burn a mansion, so we had a very large miniature about the size of a minivan that we burned. It was all black, so we could put the flames on the historical building that we were actually shooting. Gary Jackamuk, who was a compositor on those shots, came up with a really nice technique using a accumulation buffer, so that every time the flame passed over something, it would get a little darker, right? So every frame would just make it slightly darker, so it was like it was getting charred. And it actually had the nice, shape of the flame and all that. And anyway, it was a really nice technique, and it worked out well. So it looked like the building was really burning. Oh, and of course, we had to turn the vampires to dust when they got sunlight hit them. There was a particle system in Prisms before it was Houdini, and Peter from Rhythm and Hughes. He was the guy in charge of getting like bits to fall off and all that kind of stuff, and chunks of things to move, and did a very nice job with it. And so we used that in addition to some things we shot, and put it all together in comp.